We're living in a very interesting time right now when a generation of young women history professors are writing some really brilliant books just now, and she's one of those. That the U.S. Constitution was written by a particular social group for the benefit of that particular social group is well known. The reading from Professor Rosenfeld, I think, fairly well summarizes the mindset of the founders of the U.S. They were setting up a sweet deal for themselves, and they had no intention of cutting anybody else into that sweet deal. As a matter of fact, most of them were horrified by the masses. They were following their favorite political philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, who said, "It is not wisdom, but authority that makes laws." Think about how we tell the story of the United States. U.S. history is generally told with two heuristics. One is wars, and the other is civil rights struggles. So to think about that, I want you to get out your Hammurabi decoder ring, if you brought it today. The great chain of being, you've heard of that. The concept is as old as agricultural kingdoms. It's an idea that preceded its naming because it was simply assumed to be the way of being. Humans were the crown of creation and in charge of the earth and the animals and the planet. But in this way of thinking, humanity was not the tippity top up there, for the gods had created human beings and the earth and all of its flora and fauna for a reason. The earth and all of its flora and fauna were to be for the express use of humanity. Furthermore, those gods in charge issued orders that ensured order, both seasonal and social. And those gods would continue guaranteeing the order that they had created if humanity properly worshiped the gods and properly respected the social order. It was a big, long chain of being, and the chain was hooked to the existence of the gods. The Code of Hammurabi from ancient Mesopotamia dates back to somewhere around 1800 before the Common Era. The code, quite literally, was carved in stone. And let me read the beginning of it for you so you get the idea. When Anu, the sublime, king of the Anuki, and Bel, lord of heaven and earth, who decreed the fate of the land, assigned to Marduk, the overruling son of Ea, god of righteousness, dominion over earthly man, and made him great among the Igigi, they called Babylon by this illustrious name, and made it great everlasting kingdom in it, whose foundations are laid so solidly as those of both heaven and the earth. Then Anu and Bel called by name me Hammurabi, the exalted prince who feared God to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evildoers, so that the strong should not harm the weak, so that I should rule over the people like Shamash, that's the God of justice, and enlighten the land to further the well-being of mankind. End quote. Pretty impressive, isn't it? There follows 282 laws. It's a big, long stone, all right? It's tall. Covering everything from the fair price of a ferry trip to the proper charges veterinarians should do, and how much an ox's eye was worth. Anu, A-N-U, is the creator god of the Babylonians. So the code starts at the top, as it were, going through how the gods are organized, then on to Hammurabi, the top human being on the chain, a man who respects the gods and who intends to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land. Now, this code is a Bronze Age piece of writing, roughly 4,000 years old. And when I was in school, the agricultural kingdoms of Mesopotamia were referred to as the beginning of civilization, with the implication that those who preceded the Bronze Age and those who did not practice this sort of patriarchal social order were uncivilized savages, which is not a very polite term for all the human beings living on the planet at that time, or those who had lived for the 50,000 years before they thought all of this up in human history. But so goes history. Not polite at all, but a key part of the eventual European colonialist insistence that agricultural and then industrial states were the only legitimate way to do civilization. Now notice that this hierarchy is the social setup also among the Hebrew people in the Bible with their 10 commandments, and it's the way that the Romans did things, and on and on and on. When our fundamentalist Christian friends claim that God is punishing the United States for one sin or another, or that God has chosen one particular leader or another, they are referring to Hammurabi's style of governing. That's what they have in mind. It's a little agey at this point. In their mind, there's a chain of being, and it's all hooked to God at the top, who is in charge. You know, I'm not one of those anti-religion people who think that religions are a scam by the man to assert power. I suspect that Hammurabi probably actually believed what he was dishing out. But you know, it's one of the great human mysteries as to why people in Mesopotamia started settling down into agricultural societies and accepting that kind of patriarchal hierarchy. There's clear evidence from bones that the number and quality of calories for the average human being dropped in the change from hunter-gatherer to agricultural societies. In addition, contagious diseases increased, so people lived shorter lives. Civilization was bad for the average person. So why did they ever do it? There the people were. They were having a cool paleo diet. Right. And then some Hammurabis come along and say, hey, I want you to drop your hunting and your fishing and start following around an ox all day plowing, barefooted. Who would do that? I don't know how many of you have driven oxen before. My uncle had a pair of them when I was a little kid, and I got the chance to drive them. You don't drive an ox with harness like you do horses and mules, you know, pulling on reins like that. All oxen have is a wooden yoke. And to work oxen, you get a big stick and you hit them with it. That's how you drive oxen. And I wouldn't want to do that barefooted all day, believe me. So why did people ever do it? There's lots of speculation, but nobody knows. Now, I do have a guess, and I'm semi-educated on the point, I guess. I've read a lot about it. My guess is beer. It's hard to brew beer when you're a nomad or a hunter-gatherer. Think about it. One of the oldest human documents, and it's older than Hammurabi's code, is a Sumerian beer recipe. But that's just my guess. More historically present in the times of the Mesopotamian kingdoms, this hierarchy style of government was never seriously questioned for generations until the Puritans came along in Great Britain. Now, sure, lots of revolutions and usurpations of power had occurred over those many years, but always the usurpers claimed to be the rightful ruler, restoring the order that the gods actually wanted. The chain was still hooked to the gods who guaranteed all the righteousness and legitimacy. They were just a better one than that guy. The Puritans changed this equation. They claimed that God was now appointing people other than monarchs to ensure a godly social order, and they proved their point by lopping off the head of their king, who had been divinely appointed, at least he said. Then the Puritans set up their own godly dictatorship. Now, they weren't in principle questioning the great chain of being at that point. The great chain of being was still hooked to God for legitimacy, but they were questioning how those links were supposed to be going together. Their murder of their duly appointed king set in motion a domino effect leading to the claim among American and later French revolutionaries, vox populi, vox Dei. Vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. You see where they're going with that. This was something new under the sun, at least in the tradition of agricultural kingdoms. Part of this claim goes all the way back to good old Hammurabi, the gods guarantee order when people respect the gods. All right? It's just that the Puritans in England and the colonists in America and the citizens of France were listening to different gods, or something like that. This leads me to an interesting question. How do citizens go about hearing and interpreting the voice of God to keep that chain hooked up there? Should they be listening to clergy? Is it pure numbers and therefore democracy? Or does divinity speak through leaders elected by the people and therefore a republic is the way to go? Furthermore, here in the United States anyway, the political right, the political left, and the center all claim they speak for God. So, is Dei's vox on the left, the right, or the middle? Or is Dei's vox only known after each vote is tallied or a bill gets passed? Who decides? Because, to quote my favorite Radiohead lyric, just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there. Who decides? It isn't an abstract philosophical or theological question that I'm asking. The present condition of the United States is due to what I would call epistemological chaos. Epistemology is how you figure out what's true and real. We don't know, or at least we don't agree, what the hook is hanging on anymore. Or is there even a great chain of being? For the minority of us who don't believe there are any gods directing human actions or legitimizing human governments, what then? What do we do now? Are we saying that the universe is ordered by natural laws, not the gods? Are we religious naturalists? And if so, how are we expecting the Hammurabis on our planet to figure out how to govern? Prayer, meditation, tradition, reason, art, opinion polls. And then, of course, there's that question about the separation of church and state. You see, I have a few questions. On the stelae that Hammurabi's code is carved on, Hammurabi is depicted with a rod and a tape measure. The message is that he's measuring people and he's whacking those who deserve whacking, and the gods approve. Now, during Black History Month, it is particularly appropriate that we consider justice and law and how those get meted out in our society. Just as in the case of wealth here in the United States, justice and law are not equally and equitably distributed. We don't have, and I suspect we won't have, a Hammurabi come along. So, how are we going to right the inequities? The divine right of kings became the will of the people in all of this revolutionary talk. But the thinking of Western nations and their westernized colonies, such as the U.S., remain the same for almost everybody across the political spectrum. We have too often assumed that the great chain of being has a hook up there that guarantees that everything will work properly and everything will be in good order. Too often, we have assumed that there's a higher purpose to what we're doing here. We assume there must be some kind of powerful will, God or the people or both or whatever. And that's driving us ever higher. And we assume we're here building a nation that is ever more free and just for all. Paradise is right around the corner. But thinking about it a moment, we never quite get to the corner, do we? How come? Might it be that the quote in your order of service this morning from Game of Thrones sums it up? Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall. Might we all be enthralled by a mere play of light that tells us democracy actually works? The contemporary French philosopher Alain Badiou has proposed that Western politics is not representative, but presentative. Not representative, but presentative. By which he means, look at what the governments are actually doing. Look at how the society actually exists. That is the will of the people manifesting itself, no matter what the pretensions toward democracy. Badiou sure looks right when we look at racism here in the United States. It's a hydra. We keep cutting off a head or two every generation, and then 2 or 3 more pop right back up. And the evils just keep recycling over and over. What if Badiou is correct in his assessment? The Western democracies are not representative, they are presentative. Who and what exactly is represented in representative government? Whose will are we talking about? Now, frankly, I think Badiou is wrong. I think that Western democracies are neither representative nor presentative, because Badiou assumes that we have already created democracies, and I don't think we've ever actually managed that. I don't think we've yet achieved a method to reflect the will of the majority of the people, who I think are probably reasonable and kind of nice if we got the chance to find out. Further, I think the reason we failed is that too many of us still think that the hook way up there at the top of the great chain of being is somehow magic, thus excusing ourselves from the real hard work of governing ourselves justly. Here's the reality of our situation. I think there's no great chain of being, and there's no magic. Seriously, think about it. How well is the U.S. government representing your will right now, this minute? I thought so. But here's the kicker. Somehow, somewhere, many of us deeply believe that in some magical, far-off future, the government will represent our will. Now, you see how that's actually just reheated religion, right? It's just reheated religion. What if we have replaced the hokum of the divine right of kings with the hokum of the will of the people, and neither of those things offer any help in self-government at all? I think that's worth thinking about, even if I'm wrong about it. I think maybe it's worth thinking about to clarify your own values. After all, share the planet is not a pipe dream. All of us already share the planet. That's not the question. The major challenges confronting us at the moment: global climate crisis, growing inequality all over the planet, mass migration. These are all problems across national boundaries because we already share the planet, but we don't do it equitably. Sharing it consciously, generously, and fully, that's a different question. Bears some thinking about. And some work, I think. But it's a worthy goal, as I say every Sunday, a shared life in a shared world. That's where the hope is. Not optimism, I guess I'd say, but hope. As I've said before, humanism's core value is that people matter more than ideas. Devotion to nature and life as it actually exists is the core of the humanist message. That's hope, not optimism, but I believe that is the hope for humanity.